The birth of a visionary Vinci, Italy, April 15, 1452. In a small village in the hills of Tuscany, a child is born who would challenge all limits of the human mind. Leonardo da Vinci would not just be an artist. He would be the very definition of genius, a man who would see the future 500 years in advance. Piero da Vinci, a respected notary from Florence, never imagined that his illegitimate son would become history's greatest polymath. Caterina, a local peasant woman, gave birth to a child who would carry in his mind the seeds of an intellectual revolution we are still trying to comprehend today. But from his earliest years, Leonardo was different. While other children played with simple toys, Leonardo dissected dead flowers, observed the flight of birds for hours, asked questions that left adults perplexed. Why does water flow this way? Why do shadows have specific shapes? How do muscles move bones? At age 5, Leonardo went to live with his father in Florence. It was 1457, and the city was at the height of the Renaissance, a cauldron of art, science, politics, and commerce that would shape the young genius's mind. Florence was ruled by the Medici, a family of bankers who had transformed the city into the intellectual center of Europe. Artists like Donatello, architects like Brunelleschi, humanists like Pico della Mirandola, all converged in this metropolis where knowledge was valued above all else. But Leonardo, even in this extraordinary environment, stood out. At 10 years old, he already demonstrated artistic abilities that impressed experienced masters. His paintings were not just beautiful, they were scientifically precise. Each shadow, each reflection, each proportion revealed a mind that understood the mathematics behind beauty. In 1466, at age 14, Ser Piero secured Leonardo a position as an apprentice in the workshop of Andrea del Verrocchio, one of Florence's most respected artists. Verrocchio's workshop was more than an atelier. It was a practical university where young men learned not only painting and sculpture, but engineering, architecture, anatomy, optics. It was the perfect environment for a mind like Leonardo's. Verrocchio quickly realized he had a prodigy on his hands. Leonardo didn't just absorb techniques, he improved them. He didn't just copy the masters, he surpassed them. Legend tells that when Leonardo painted an angel in Verrocchio's Baptism of Christ, the master was so impressed that he swore never to pick up brushes again. It was an exaggerated story, but it reflected a truth. Leonardo possessed a talent that transcended any training. During his years as an apprentice, Leonardo began developing his famous notebooks, page after page of observations, drawings, theories, inventions. It was a mind in constant motion, recording everything, questioning everything. But Leonardo was not just an exceptional artist, he was a natural scientist. While other artists were content to represent the surface of things, Leonardo wanted to understand their essence. He dissected corpses to understand human anatomy, studied plants to understand how they grow, observed flowing water to decipher the laws of hydraulics. In 1472, at age 20, Leonardo was accepted into the Guild of Painters of Florence. He was officially a master, but his mind was already flying far beyond the artistic conventions of his time. Leonardo began imagining machines that didn't exist: helicopters, tanks, submarines, parachutes. These were concepts so advanced that his contemporaries considered them impossible fantasies. But Leonardo saw the future. He understood physical principles that would only be discovered centuries later. His flying machines anticipated the Wright brothers by 400 years. His anatomical studies revealed details that would only be confirmed by modern medicine. His theories about optics preceded Newton by 2 centuries. During this period, Leonardo also developed his revolutionary technique of sfumato, the art of creating smooth transitions between colors and tones, eliminating hard lines. It was an innovation that would make his paintings seem alive in ways never seen before. In 1476, Leonardo faced his first major scandal. He was accused, along with other young Florentines, of sodomy, a serious accusation in Christian Florence of the 15th century. The charges were eventually dropped for lack of evidence, but the incident marked Leonardo deeply. He became even more reserved, even more focused on his work, even more careful with his personal relationships. It was also during this period that Leonardo began writing in mirror script, from right to left, so that his notes could only be read using a mirror. Some say it was to protect his secrets. Others believe it was simply more natural for him, being left-handed. The truth is that Leonardo was always a man of mysteries. In 1478, Leonardo received his first important commission, an altarpiece for the chapel of San Bernardo in the Palazzo della Signoria. But as would be typical in his career, Leonardo never completed the work. His mind was already flying to new projects, new discoveries, new possibilities. It was a pattern that would define his life. Absolute genius combined with an inability to be satisfied with past achievements. In 1481, at age 29, Leonardo began working on the Adoration of the Magi for the monastery of San Donato, a Scopeto. Once again, the work would remain unfinished, but the sketches and studies that survived reveal a mind functioning at a level his contemporaries could barely comprehend. Leonardo wasn't just painting, he was reinventing art itself. His compositions were mathematically perfect. His human figures were anatomically precise. His understanding of perspective was so advanced that it created illusions of depth that seemed magical. But Florence, brilliant as it was beginning to feel too small for Leonardo's mind. In 1482, at age 30, Leonardo wrote an extraordinary letter to Ludovico Sforza, the powerful Duke of Milan. The letter was essentially a resume, but a resume like none had ever been written. Leonardo offered himself not just as an artist, but as a military engineer, architect, inventor, scientist. He promised to create war machines that would make Milan invincible, monuments that would last forever, works of art that would surpass everything ever seen. It was a bold promise from a 30-year-old. But Leonardo da Vinci was never modest about his abilities. He knew exactly what he was worth, and soon the world would discover that his promises were not exaggerations, they were understatements. Milan awaited him, and with it the most productive and revolutionary period of the greatest genius humanity has ever known. The Milan polymath, reinventing reality. Milan, 1482. Leonardo da Vinci arrived at the court of Ludovico Sforza not as a simple Florentine artist, but as a man who promised to revolutionize warfare, architecture, art, and science itself. At 30, Leonardo was ready to prove that a single mind could master every field of human knowledge. Ludovico Sforza, known as Il Moro, was one of the most powerful men in Italy. Milan was wealthy, strategic, and constantly threatened by enemies. Sforza needed military advantages, and Leonardo had promised exactly that. Leonardo's presentation letter had been a masterpiece of personal marketing. He had listed 10 military capabilities, from building indestructible bridges to creating armored vehicles, before mentioning almost casually that he also knew how to paint. It was a brilliant strategy. Leonardo understood that in times of war, art was luxury, but military technology was necessity. In his first months in Milan, Leonardo transformed his famous notebooks into innovation laboratories. Page after page filled with drawings that seemed straight out of a science fiction movie. Armored tanks powered by cranks, multiple-barrel cannons, flying machines with wings that flapped like birds. But Leonardo wasn't just a dreamer, he was a practical engineer. His war machines were based on solid physical principles. His tanks had functional gear systems. His cannons incorporated real ballistic innovations. His fortification designs revolutionized military architecture. Leonardo was literally inventing the future of warfare. During this period, Leonardo also deepened his studies of human anatomy. In secret, he dissected corpses at the hospital of Santa Maria delle Grazie, mapping every muscle, every organ, every blood vessel. These were dangerous studies. The Church prohibited human dissection, considering it profanation. But Leonardo was obsessed with understanding how the human body really worked. His anatomical drawings were of a precision that wouldn't be matched until the 19th century. Leonardo discovered details about the heart, lungs, and nervous system that official medicine would take centuries to confirm. He was the first to correctly draw the heart's valves, the first to map the brain's ventricles, the first to understand how muscles work in groups to create movement. Leonardo was single-handedly conducting a medical revolution. In 1485, plague struck Milan, killing a third of the population. While others fled in panic, Leonardo saw an opportunity to redesign the city itself. He created plans for an ideal city. A revolutionary urban project with 2 levels of streets, advanced sewage systems, canals for transportation, planned green spaces. It was urbanism 5 centuries before Le Corbusier. Leonardo understood that diseases spread through crowding and lack of hygiene. His ideal city incorporated public health principles that would only be discovered in the modern era. But Leonardo's urban projects were too ambitious for his time. Sforza and other nobles couldn't visualize cities built scientifically. To them, cities grew organically, without planning. Leonardo, once again, was centuries ahead of his time. During his years in Milan, Leonardo also worked on theatrical spectacles for the court. But even here, his genius manifested in unique ways. Leonardo created scenarios with complex machines that produced spectacular special effects. Mountains moved, rivers appeared from nowhere, angels descended from the heavens through systems of pulleys and gears. He was inventing modern theatre, combining art with technology in ways never seen. In 1490, Leonardo met Giacomo Caprotti, a 10-year-old boy who would become his assistant and companion for more than 25 years. Leonardo called him Salai, little devil, because of his mischievous nature. Salai represented for Leonardo not just an assistant, but an emotional connection he had always lacked. Leonardo never married, never had children of his own. Salai filled part of that void. The relationship was complex, part paternal, part romantic, part artistic. Salai appears in many of Leonardo's drawings, always portrayed with idealized beauty. It was during this period that Leonardo began working on his most ambitious project in Milan, a colossal equestrian statue, 24 feet high, to honor Francesco Sforza, Ludovico's father. The Gran Cavallo would be the largest bronze statue ever created. Leonardo studied equine anatomy obsessively, created special furnaces for bronze, developed revolutionary molding techniques. But the project faced enormous obstacles. It would require 75 tons of bronze, an astronomical quantity for the time. The casting would require technologies that didn't yet exist. Leonardo worked on the project for more than a decade, creating a clay model that impressed visitors from all over Europe. But the final statue was never completed. In 1499, when the French invaded Milan, soldiers used the clay model for target practice. Centuries of work were destroyed in an afternoon. It was a cruel metaphor for Leonardo's relationship with the world. His visions were too grand, his achievements impossible to protect. But not all of Leonardo's projects in Milan ended in failure. Between 1495 and 1498, he painted The Last Supper on the wall of the refectory of the convent of Santa Maria delle Grazie. The work would be considered one of humanity's greatest artistic achievements. Leonardo revolutionized fresco painting. Instead of using the traditional technique, which required painting quickly on wet plaster, he developed an experimental method that allowed working slowly with absolute precision. The Last Supper was not just a religious painting, it was a profound psychological study. Each apostle had a unique expression, an individual reaction to Christ's announcement of betrayal. Leonardo had captured not just a moment, but the entire range of human emotions. The mathematical composition of the work was perfect. The perspective created an illusion of depth that made viewers feel they were present at the scene. Gestures and gazes created lines of force that directed attention exactly where Leonardo wanted. It was art elevated to the level of science. But even The Last Supper demonstrated Leonardo's flaws. His experimental technique began deteriorating almost immediately. By the 16th century, the paint was already flaking. Leonardo had created a masterpiece that began destroying itself before his death. In 1499, the French conquered Milan. Ludovico Sforza was captured and died in prison. The golden age of the Milanese court had ended. Leonardo, at 47, found himself once again without a patron, without a home, without protection. But he carried with him something more valuable than any treasure. Notebooks full of discoveries that would change the world, a mind that had pushed the limits of human knowledge, a vision of the future that humanity would take centuries to achieve. Leonardo da Vinci was ready for his next phase, an era when he would create his most famous works and make his most revolutionary discoveries. The world still didn't fully understand what it had lost in Milan, but it would soon discover what it had gained. The Return, a new Florence, 1500. Leonardo da Vinci returned to his native city as a stranger in familiar land. 18 years in Milan had transformed not only Leonardo, but the entire artistic landscape of Florence. Michelangelo had emerged as a rival force. Raphael was gaining recognition, and a new generation of artists was redefining Renaissance art standards. But Leonardo returned with something none of his rivals possessed, a mind that had completely transcended the limitations of his era. At 48, Leonardo was no longer just an exceptionally talented artist. He was a scientist who understood physical laws that wouldn't be formally discovered for centuries, an engineer who designed machines that seemed magical, an anatomist who knew the human body better than any living physician. Florence received him as a celebrity, but also with certain suspicion. Leonardo had acquired a reputation for leaving works unfinished, for getting lost in impossible projects, for being more interested in experimentation than completion. It was a fair criticism, but one that revealed more about his contemporaries' limitations than Leonardo's. In 1503, Leonardo was commissioned to paint a fresco in the Sala del Gran Consiglio of Palazzo Vecchio, depicting the Battle of Anghiari. It was a prestigious project that would put him in direct competition with Michelangelo, who would paint the Battle of Cassina on the opposite wall. It would be known as the Duel of the Titans. Two of history's greatest geniuses working in the same space, trying to surpass each other. Leonardo approached the project with his characteristic obsessiveness. He studied historical battles, equine anatomy, smoke and dust effects, combat psychology. His preparatory sketches were masterpieces in themselves. But once again, Leonardo decided to experiment with untested techniques. Instead of using traditional fresco, he tried a method based on ancient texts by Pliny, using a mixture of wax and pigments. The experiment was a disaster. The paint began to melt and run down the wall. Leonardo abandoned the project, leaving only fragments of what could have been his greatest public achievement. Michelangelo, in turn, never even began his painting, having been called to Rome by the Pope. The Duel of the Titans ended with no winners, but with a cruel lesson about the dangers of excessive innovation. It was during this frustrating period that Leonardo began working on a portrait that would forever change art history. Lisa Gherardini, wife of Francesco del Giocondo, a Florentine silk merchant, posed for Leonardo in sessions that would extend for years. What began as a simple commission transformed into an artistic obsession. Leonardo saw in Lisa, or Mona Lisa, more than a portrait subject. He saw an opportunity to create the perfect painting, to capture not just physical appearance, but human essence. The portrait evolved slowly, each session adding layers of psychological complexity. Leonardo applied his sfumato techniques with precision never before achieved, creating light and shadow transitions so smooth they seemed to breathe. Mona Lisa's eyes followed the observer because of an optical trick Leonardo had discovered through his perspective studies. The enigmatic smile resulted from deep understanding of facial anatomy and human psychology. Leonardo was creating more than art. He was creating magic, but the Mona Lisa was never delivered to the client. Leonardo fell in love with his creation and carried it with him for the rest of his life, making constant adjustments, never considering it completely finished. It was typical of Leonardo, the pursuit of perfection, making completion impossible. During his years in Florence, Leonardo also intensified his scientific studies. He dissected more than 30 human bodies, creating the most precise anatomical drawings ever produced. Leonardo discovered that the heart had 4 chambers, not 2 as believed. He mapped the nervous system with precision that wouldn't be surpassed until the microscope's invention. He understood blood circulation in ways that anticipated Harvey by a century. His optic studies explained how the eye focused light, knowledge that wouldn't be formalized until Newton. His geological observations anticipated theories about Earth's age that would only be accepted in the 19th century. Leonardo was single-handedly conducting a scientific revolution, but his methods were so advanced that few contemporaries could follow his reasoning. He published little, preferred working in secret, communicated through codes and symbols. He was a solitary genius in an era not yet ready for his discoveries. In 1506, Leonardo was invited back to Milan by French governor Charles d'Amboise. France had conquered the duchy and wanted to leverage the great master's talents. Leonardo accepted the offer, but with conditions. He wanted complete freedom to research, unlimited resources for experiments, protection for his scientific investigations. The French agreed. They understood that Leonardo was not just an artist, he was a national treasure who could give France technological advantages over its rivals. Back in Milan, Leonardo dedicated himself to hydraulic engineering projects. He designed canal systems that could transform the region's agriculture, machines that could drain swamps, devices that could control floods. Leonardo understood that water control was key to economic power. His hydraulic innovations could feed populations, power machines, defend territories. He was anticipating the Industrial Revolution by 3 centuries. During this period, Leonardo also deepened his flight studies. He observed birds obsessively, analyzing every aspect of how they stayed airborne. Leonardo understood that flight was a question of aerodynamics, not brute force. His flying machines incorporated principles that would only be rediscovered by the Wright brothers in 1903. He drew helicopters, parachutes, hang gliders. Each design was based on rigorous scientific observation and deep physical understanding. Leonardo was the first human to truly understand how flight worked. In 1513, Leonardo moved to Rome, invited by Pope Leo VI of the Medici family. Rome was the center of papal power and a magnet for artists and intellectuals. But Leonardo, at 61, was becoming impatient with his era's limitations. His ideas were too advanced, his projects too ambitious, his vision too distant. Rome offered resources, but also bureaucracy. prestige but also restrictions. Leonardo felt like a bird trapped in a golden cage. It was during this period that Leonardo began organizing his notebooks, trying to systematize decades of discoveries. He dreamed of publishing treatises that would revolutionize art, science, engineering, but Leonardo was never a systematic writer. His notes jumped from anatomy to hydraulics, from optics to botany, from mathematics to philosophy. It was a mind in perpetual motion. In 1516, a final opportunity arose. Francis I, the young king of France, offered Leonardo a unique position: premier peintre, ingénieur et architecte du roi. First painter, engineer, and architect of the king. Leonardo would have his own castle in Amboise, a generous pension, complete freedom to research and create. In exchange, he would be the king's personal scientific consultant. It was an offer Leonardo couldn't refuse. At 64, carrying his notebooks and most precious paintings, including the Mona Lisa, Leonardo crossed the Alps toward France. It was his final move, his last chance to see his visions realized. History's greatest genius was entering his final years, but still had secrets to reveal to the world. The eternal visionary, legacy for the future, Château du Clos, Lucé, France, 1516. Leonardo da Vinci, at 64, established himself in his final residence, an elegant castle just steps from Château d'Amboise, where King Francis I lived. It was a perfect arrangement. The young French monarch, fascinated by art and science, had offered history's greatest genius complete freedom to explore the universe's mysteries. Francis I didn't see Leonardo merely as a decorative artist. He understood he had in his hands a mind that could give France technological, scientific, and cultural advantages over all of Europe. No man was ever born knowing so much about painting, sculpture, and architecture, Francis I said about Leonardo. But more than that, he is a true philosopher. In his first months at Clos Lucé, Leonardo transformed the castle into a personal laboratory and museum. His most precious paintings decorated the walls. His notebooks spread across every table. Models of his machines occupied all available spaces. Francis I visited Leonardo almost daily, not as a king inspecting a subject, but as an eager student learning from a master. Leonardo demonstrated his flying machines, explained his anatomical studies, revealed the secrets of his pictorial techniques. For the king, these conversations were more valuable than any royal treasure. But Leonardo was fighting against time and the limitations of his own body. His right arm had been partially paralyzed, possibly by a stroke. The man who had created some of history's most precise works could now barely hold a brush. Still, Leonardo continued working. He dictated observations to assistants, supervised experiments, refined theories he had developed over decades. During this period, Leonardo concentrated his efforts on 3 final projects that summarized his genius: organizing his scientific studies, planning an ideal city for the king, and preparing his notebooks for posterity. The ideal city project for Francis I was typically ambitious. Leonardo imagined a metropolis with navigable canals, advanced sewage systems, buildings designed to optimize light and ventilation, scientifically planned public spaces. It was urbanism 5 centuries before its time. Leonardo understood that well-planned cities didn't just house people, they shaped civilizations. His ideas about population density, traffic flow, public health, and environmental sustainability would only be discovered in the modern era. But perhaps his most important project at Clos Lucé was attempting to systematize a lifetime's knowledge. Leonardo spent his final years reorganizing thousands of pages of notes, drawings, and theories. He dreamed of publishing definitive treatises on anatomy, hydraulics, optics, military engineering, architecture. It was an impossible task. Leonardo had accumulated knowledge that would fill an entire library. His mind had jumped between fields of study in ways that defied any linear organization. Worse still, many of his discoveries were so advanced that vocabularies didn't exist to describe them. Leonardo was trying to explain concepts for which language hadn't yet been invented. During this period, Leonardo also reflected on the meaning of his own life. He had painted fewer than 20 works that survived to the present day, but each had revolutionized art. He had designed hundreds of machines, but few were built in his lifetime. He had made scientific discoveries that would change the world, but most remained in his private notebooks. It was Leonardo's paradox, a man whose achievements were so advanced that his own era couldn't understand or implement them. In his darkest moments, Leonardo wondered if he had wasted his talents on impossible projects. Other artists left finished works, lasting monuments, tangible legacies. Leonardo would leave mainly unanswered questions and unrealized visions, but he profoundly underestimated his own impact. Even in life, Leonardo had influenced an entire generation of artists, engineers, and scientists. His observation methods, artistic techniques, interdisciplinary approach were spreading throughout Europe. Young artists copied his sfumato, engineers studied his mechanical designs, anatomists consulted his medical drawings. Leonardo had planted seeds that would flourish for centuries. In April 1519, Leonardo felt his death approaching. He called a notary and dictated his will. Salai, his longtime companion, would inherit his paintings and properties. Francesco Melzi, his most dedicated assistant, received his scientific notebooks and the responsibility of preserving his intellectual legacy. Leonardo knew he was entrusting Melzi with something more valuable than gold, the accumulated knowledge of a lifetime of genius. On May 2, 1519, at age 67, Leonardo da Vinci died at Clos-Lucé. Romantic legend says he died in King Francis III's arms, but historical records suggest the king was in Saint-Germain-en-Laye at the time. It doesn't matter. Leonardo had found in Francis I the patron he had always sought, someone who valued his ideas above his paintings. Francesco Melzi was devastated by his master's death. "It was impossible for me to express the grief I felt at his death," he wrote. "As long as I live, I will continue to feel sadness, justified by the ardent and most devoted love he bore me daily." Leonardo was buried in the church of Saint-Florentin in Amboise. His tomb was later lost during the French Wars of Religion, but this seemed appropriate. Leonardo was always greater than any physical monument. After Leonardo's death, Melzi attempted to fulfill his promise to preserve and organize his master's notebooks. It was an overwhelming task, more than 13,000 pages of notes in mirror writing, covering dozens of fields of study. Melzi managed to compile the Treatise on Painting based on Leonardo's notes, but died before completing larger projects. The notebooks were dispersed among heirs, sold to collectors, scattered across Europe. It was an intellectual tragedy. Leonardo's scientific knowledge, which could have accelerated human progress by centuries, remained fragmented and largely inaccessible. Over subsequent centuries, the world slowly rediscovered Leonardo's genius. William Harvey discovered blood circulation in 1628, but Leonardo had already understood it a century earlier. Newton formulated optical laws in 1687, but Leonardo had anticipated them in 1500. The Wright brothers flew in 1903, realizing dreams Leonardo had sketched in 1490. Each new scientific discovery revealed that Leonardo had gotten there first. In the 18th century, when Leonardo's notebooks began being systematically studied, the magnitude of his genius became clear. He wasn't just a great artist. He was a scientist who had anticipated the modern scientific revolution. Voltaire called Leonardo the greatest genius who ever lived. Goethe said his works were divine. For the Enlightenment thinkers, Leonardo represented the ideal, of the Renaissance man who masters all fields of knowledge. In the 19th century, with the development of photography and mechanical reproduction, Leonardo's works became truly global. The Mona Lisa, in particular, achieved icon status that transcended art. Lisa Gherardini's enigmatic smile became art history's most recognizable face. Marcel Duchamp played with it. Andy Warhol reproduced it. Artists worldwide reinterpreted it. Leonardo had created something that became part of collective human consciousness. In the 20th century, as technology finally caught up with Leonardo's visions, his anticipatory genius became even more impressive. Modern helicopters operate on principles Leonardo had understood. Military tanks use concepts he had sketched. Parachutes work exactly as he had predicted. More impressive still, modern computers validated many of Leonardo's mathematical theories about fluid flow, anatomy, and optics. Leonardo had seen the future 500 years in advance. In the 21st century, Leonardo became a symbol of interdisciplinary creativity. Technology companies study his innovation methods. Schools teach his systems thinking approach. Scientists admire his ability to connect seemingly unrelated fields. Steve Jobs, founder of Apple, kept a Leonardo biography on his desk. Leonardo was the first to combine art and technology in truly revolutionary ways, Jobs said. He's my hero. Elon Musk cites Leonardo as inspiration for his projects in electric cars, space exploration, and artificial intelligence. Leonardo proved that one person can imagine the future and work to create it, Musk said. But perhaps Leonardo's greatest legacy isn't his specific inventions, but his approach to knowledge. Leonardo taught the world that curiosity has no limits, that art and science are inseparable, that careful observation can reveal universe secrets. He showed that true genius doesn't specialize, it diversifies, that the best ideas arise at intersections between different fields, that asking questions is more important than accepting answers. Leonardo da Vinci died more than 500 years ago, but his mind is still discovering the world. Every time a scientist observes nature to solve a technological problem, they're following Leonardo's method. Every time an artist uses scientific knowledge to create beauty, they're honoring Leonardo's legacy. Every time someone refuses to accept that it can't be done and imagines impossible solutions, they're channeling Leonardo's spirit. Leonardo da Vinci was more than a genius. He was a force of nature that pushed humanity toward the future. We live today in the world he imagined, a world where machines fly, where images move, where knowledge transcends borders, where art and science dance together. And we're still only beginning to reach his vision. Leonardo da Vinci saw the future, and the future was magnificent. This was another episode of Iconic Figures. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful documentaries about the minds and leaders who changed the world.